Everybody. Welcome to the information session for the Mt Arapiles Tour and State Park Cultural Landscape and Recent Rediscoveries. This is by popular demand. We had to change the format for this particular information session. We had over 200 registrations for it. I know in a post-COVID landscape, we're really looking forward to run some of these sessions face-to-face. For the moment, I'm sure you, like me, have been getting accustomed to some of the MS Teams and the ways we can manage these meetings. We've got a lot of information we'd like to get through tonight, and really looking forward to having that conversation with you. My name is David Petty. I'm the Manager of Community Engagement and Partnerships for Western Region. I've recently rejoined Parks Victoria after a 4-year absence. The reason I'm back is that for conversations like this, it's really important in public land to be discussing these matters with traditional owners and with communities. Really looking forward to sharing some information with you today. Before I go any further, I'll just do an acknowledgement of country. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the land on which we're meeting today, the various lands on which we're meeting today. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. Particular mention for the Wodjumbaluk peoples, particularly with respect to Arapiles, and I would like to pass on my acknowledgements. I'd also like to call out and acknowledge Darren Griffin, who is the RAP manager for the Barangigadjin Land Council, who's joining us today. So welcome, Darren. And just getting through to a few more of the introductions. So today we're going to go through a presentation, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers towards the end of the session. Again, looking forward to doing this face-to-face. Given the nature of the webinar format, this is all going to be via typing through questions, and I'll get through some of the technical aspects of that in a second. Presenters today are going to be Will Cox, who is Parks Victoria's Senior Manager for projects, and has been looking into the cultural heritage and looking after that for the last few years. Simon Crocker, who is from Aboriginal Victoria, he's Manager of Heritage Operations. Other Parks Victoria staff on hand will be Jamie Staples, who's our District Manager for South West. Maria Pizzi will be joining us, who's the Director of Managing Country Together. And as I said, Darren Griffin, who's the RAP manager, who will also be with us today to go through this presentation and go through some of the information. So from a technology point of view, there is a comments section here, so do encourage you to put your questions up into the comment section. We'll be moderating the content there. It is important to us that we have a really mutually respectful conversation today. So just flagging that we will be moderating the questions. Where we've got similar questions, we'll try to group those together, just in the interest of getting through as much of this information as possible over the next hour and a half. Do ask everybody to be respectful with the way that they put their questions in there, and looking forward to getting some robust discussion happening through this forum. We'll be recording the session today. I know it was really popular when we advertised this one, but for those who aren't able to make it, we will be recording it and providing that to whoever would like to review it. We'll be in a few sections just talking about protection of values on country. We'll be going through the assessments of Mt Arapiles Tour and State Park and the associated protections. Also looking forward, what's the sort of the next 6 months is going to look like, and also the really important part and part of my job, which is the engaging with the community, and really looking forward to getting some discussion happening around that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Will Cox, who will go through the first part of this presentation.
Will, you're on mute.
Great start. My apologies. It's nice to be with you all today, and I look
look forward to sharing this presentation with you. I will start off with providing a little bit of context around the co-management arrangements at Mt Arapiles 2 and State Park. It is known as Duerite by the Wotjobaluk people. Parks Victoria refers to Mt Arapiles as Duerite on a regular basis. The area has for thousands of years been an important cultural place and an important cultural landscape. Deep spiritual and cultural connections to the area are still maintained and recognised. Barinji Gadjan Land Council, or BGLC as many people refer to them, is recognised by the federal government and the state governments as having authority to speak on behalf of the Wotjobaluk peoples, and has co-managed the Mt Arapiles 2 and State Park with Parks Victoria since 2005. A co-management means that Parks Victoria makes decisions in partnership with the Barinji Gadjan Land Council, and that's across all aspects of park management for Mt Arapiles. The Victorian government is currently in negotiations with the Wotjobaluk peoples in relation to the Traditional Owner Settlement Act 2010, with a settlement expected within 12 months that will likely lead to a joint management arrangement between Parks Victoria and BGLC. Thanks, Cole. Okay, so I just want to provide a little bit of, as a bit of a lead up into Simon's couple of slides, but in terms of the protection of cultural values on Parks Victoria's estate, primarily in the National Parks, the National Parks Act 1975 requires Parks Victoria to take action to protect cultural values and uphold compliance with the Aboriginal Heritage Act 2006. All cultural values are subject to the same level of protection. There is no hierarchy of importance. So rock art, quarry sites, artefact scatters, all values are treated with the same level of importance. So Parks Victoria works in partnership with traditional owners to ensure all these values are protected from harm. And for Mt Arapiles, we've worked very closely, as I mentioned, with BGLC. So our approach is that we install advisory signage at areas where the values have been rediscovered, requesting that visitors don't enter these areas and inadvertently cause harm to cultural values. Now, the harm to cultural values can put a person at risk of financial penalties under the Aboriginal Heritage Act 2006. So on that note, that's a little bit of background. I will throw across to Simon to provide, I guess, a little bit more perspective from Aboriginal Victoria's end. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone. So I'll just start off by referring to the harm provisions in the Aboriginal Heritage Act, which is the principal legislation that Aboriginal Victoria administers. So I understand there's new signs being installed at various places around Arapiles, which will refer to these harm provisions. So the Act sets out that it's illegal to harm Aboriginal cultural heritage. This includes damage, deface, desecrate, destroy, disturb, injure or interfere with. And as many of you know, there's also significant financial penalties for causing harm to Aboriginal cultural heritage. But the Act does more than make it an offence to harm Aboriginal places and objects. It also establishes mechanisms to ensure these places and objects are protected and managed during land use and development activities. And most of the work that Aboriginal Victoria seeks to achieve and registered Aboriginal parties is to assist people use and develop land in a way that reduces their risk of harming places and objects. The worst case scenario for us is where we are following up on cases of harm. This is a bad outcome for heritage, and we prefer to be proactive in helping people avoid harm in the first instance. So the principal mechanism that we operate under in the Act is the Cultural Heritage Management Plan system that some of you may be aware of. So this requires an assessment and report for activities that are most likely to cause harm to Aboriginal places. There's about between 600 and 700 of these management plans prepared across Victoria each year, And they're for things like residential developments, mining activities, utility and infrastructure installations, roads, and other activities with a substantial impact to the ground surface. So management plans and cultural heritage permits work well for these activities where it's an activity that occurs once, it's for which an individual or an organisation is responsible. The mechanisms are less effective for recreational use of land by a range of different land users, and particularly so when the significance of the place is as high as it is for these rock art sites at Arapiles. So this brings me to protection declarations. Obviously, we've had the interim protection declaration over Duerite 1, which many of you would have provided input to for the minister's decision to make that declaration. So that expired several weeks ago, and now we're in the process of continuing to explore longer term protection for that area as well as other places around Arapiles, obviously. So the intent and the process for ongoing protection declarations is entirely the same as for interim protection declarations. However, as the name suggests, it's for a longer term. So an ongoing protection declaration is a set of ministerial orders about the measures to be taken to protect that place or object. And these measures, they're determined on a case-by-case basis to suit the individual circumstances and the individual land uses. So it could include things like activities that are permitted within the Aboriginal place, or the manner in which those activities are carried out, or precisely where certain activities are allowed to occur. It can also, include things like the necessary maintenance or management actions, requirements for infrastructure, gates, fencing. It's open-ended and it is tailored specifically for that Aboriginal place. So the interim protection declaration over Duerite 1 was a little unique in that it restricted all access to the place, and this was because it's a very small location, as you know, and it was important to restrict access for that period of time to allow the traditional owners and Parks Victoria and AV to consider longer term protection measures. And we're continuing to do that. It's taking, I guess, a little longer than was expected initially for Duerite 1, and we're still in that process now. So I'm going to stay on to hopefully help answer some questions later on, but that's I'll pass back to Will now.
Thanks, Simon. All right, so Parks Victoria, I'm sure the community is aware of this. We had previously advised the community, but Parks Victoria and BGLC have recently undertaken assessments of registered rock art sites in Mt Arapiles 2 and State Park and at Red Rock Bushland Reserve, as well as other areas. There were 31 sites assessed across the Garrywood and Duerite landscapes. The aim of these assessments was to determine whether rock art has been adversely impacted by visitors, pest animals or natural factors, and to provide recommendations for Parks Victoria and BGLC on how we can manage and protect these in the future. So during these assessments, so the assessments were, as I mentioned, primarily around the rock art sites. However, during the assessments, further values were rediscovered in some of the surrounding areas, just by chance. These assessments identified that some of the Aboriginal places are at risk of harm from the park visitors. Evidence of some of the visitor impacts include graffiti, litter, campfires, shotgun marks on rock faces, presence of gun pellets scattered around the ground around the sites, rock breakage, climbing chalk, and the presence of climbing bolts. So following receipt of these draft reports, Parks Victoria and Barinja Land Council have undertaken several site inspections to gain further understanding of the values and possible risks to these. And as a result, further protection measures are to be implemented, which I will run through now on the following few slides. Thanks, Kyle. So the first stage is as of the 29th of October, so following the completion of these community online sessions, advisory signage will be installed at 3 areas at Mt Arapiles 2 and State Park and 1 at Red Rock Bushland Reserve, advising of the presence of significant cultural values in the areas and requesting that visitors do not enter these areas. So these areas are Chicken Boulder, Castle Crag, and the Clark Rock Tiger Wall areas in Mt Arapiles, and Lil Lil out at Red Rock Bushland Reserve, which is also known as Black Ian's Rocks. And advisory signage remains in place at the Taylor's Rock or Deck Crag area and the Pharos Boulders areas, similarly requesting or advising people the presence of cultural values in the areas and requesting that visitors do not enter these areas. Thanks, Cole. So I'll run through each of these new areas briefly and to provide a little additional information and context. So at Castle Crag, quarry sites have been rediscovered, and Parks Victoria and BGLC request all visitors to not enter the area shown on the map. And this area includes the entirety of all cliff faces at the crag. And as with all sites, signs will be in place clearly showing the area. Thanks, Cole. At Chicken Boulder, quarry sites have been rediscovered, and significantly, or a unique value is a Hertzian percussion cone has been rediscovered, and this is evidence of the initial step in the Aboriginal quarrying process, and it's rarely seen in other stone quarries. And as with the other sites, there will be signage in place. The area that we're asking people not to enter includes all cliff faces, and we're asking people not to enter that area shown on the map. Thanks, Cole. So Clark Rock Tiger Wall. Now this is a very, very significant rediscovery. As most of us are probably aware, that there is rock art in the area, at the Clark Rock area. Further quarry sites have been rediscovered, but plus a large stone tool manufacturing site which extends northwest along the base of the wall for around 200 metres. Now, traditional owners produced a variety of stone tools in these quarries, in these manufacturing sites, for use in the immediate area and for trading with other Aboriginal groups. And the stone may have been sourced locally or from across the Jurite landscape. And some of the implements and tools that might have been manufactured include sharp-edged knives, spearheads for cutting and hunting, flat stones for grinding down foods or crushing materials, such as to make pigments for painting. Now, Parks Victoria is requesting and BGLC are requesting all visitors do not enter the area shown on the map, and the signs will be in place showing the area. Now, I'm really mindful that there has been some confusion over which climbing routes fall within the area identified. I can confirm that it includes all cliff faces in the area shaded, including Barred Buttress and Fang Buttress. However, we have had some feedback since the community or the stakeholder sessions last week, seeking further clarification around access to the climbing walls in these areas. So we will work with Barinja Gadjin Land Council in the coming weeks to clarify the extent of the areas and to determine and to clarify if access to climbing walls, for example, via a wrap-in climb-out approach, is possible. Thanks, Cole. And Lil Lil out at Red Rock Bushland Reserve. Rock art has previously been rediscovered at the area, hence the assessments. Further quarry sites have been rediscovered during those assessments. And as with the other sites, the area includes the entirety of all the cliff faces in the area shaded. Signs will be in place, and Parks Victoria and BGLC ask that visitors do not enter this area shown on the map. Thanks, Cole. So there is a second stage to our protection of the values out at Mt Arapiles. So the recent reports and site inspections have revealed that the current protection measures in place, the advisory signage out at Arapiles, are not providing the adequate protection of cultural values. Visitors have been observed entering these areas where cultural values are present and possibly causing harm, and that's despite the presence of the signage. So consequently, Parks Victoria is proceeding to formalise these areas via set-aside determinations under the National Parks Act, which will prohibit all public access to these areas. It's really important that these values are adequately protected, and set-asides are the instrument under the National Parks Act which will allow this legal enforcement. As I mentioned before, through this process, we will provide more information on the extent of the set-aside areas and opportunities to access climbing areas, e.g. the wrap-in climb-out possibility at Tiger Wall. So these set-asides will remain in place until a long-term approach to management of these sites is determined, and I will cover that in the next slide regarding some future surveys. And as always, BGLC and Parks Victoria and Aboriginal Victoria will work in partnership regarding the protection options under the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 2006. Thanks, Cole. So I just wanted to quickly summarise the 6 areas of the immediate response and the long-term approach. So with Taylor's Rock, the signage will remain in place. There will be ongoing monitoring, and Parks Victoria will proceed to a set-aside. With Pharos Boulders, the signage will remain in place. There will be ongoing monitoring, and then the set-aside will be enacted. But we will be undertaking a survey, which I will mention in a moment. Likewise, at Castle Crag, signage, monitoring, set aside and a survey. Chicken Boulder, signage, monitoring, set aside and a survey. And Park Rock Tiger Wall area, signage, monitoring, set aside and a survey. And I'll come on to the survey on the next slide, but I will just mention with Lil out at Red Rock, the Red Rock Bushland Reserve is not managed under the National Parks Act, it's managed under the Crown Land Reserves Act. So as such, we don't have the power to enact set-asides in the area. So in the short term, we will be focusing on signage and monitoring. However, the longer term site protection and access will be addressed through the draft Greater Garrywood Landscape Management Plan, which is due out for release in the next few months. Thanks, Cole. So Parks Victoria is always open for feedback and discussions with the climbing community, and we're really mindful of this process of establishing site protections on a site-by-site basis is causing some concern and uncertainty within the local community and indeed the broader rock climbing community. So over the next 6 months, Parks Victoria, in partnership with BGLC, are planning on completing archaeological surveys at all rock climbing areas at Mt Arapiles, and commencement of these surveys is imminent. Now, I might add that will be undertaken by Parks Victoria staff. We will be seeking independent peer review from a qualified archaeologist, and that archaeologist will be engaged for a public procurement process. So Parks Victoria will work with Baranti Gadgin Land Council to review the survey results and develop a plan that ensures a long-term protection of the values and articulates recreational access opportunities, including rock climbing where appropriate. So that'll be a similar process to the decision-making process that we've undertaken in the Grampians National Park, and which will become apparent through the release of the draft plan in the coming months. So the outcome of this process will provide certainty for park visitors, including the rock climbing community and the local community that they've been seeking, as to future access and climbing opportunities at Mt Arapiles. Thanks, Cole. So we have, most of you are probably aware, we have had some previous stakeholder sessions last week. So last week we met with representatives from the key rock climbing groups through the Rock Climbing Roundtable. We met with the Arapiles Advisory Group and the Arapiles District Community Group, and we thank all the representatives from those groups for some really healthy discussions. A media release and email to people who have signed up for updates was sent last week following these sessions. And as I mentioned before, we have the session that we're underway at the moment, and there is another session underway tomorrow to inform the community on the current and future protections. And these are open to anyone who is interested. And signage, as I mentioned, will be installed on Thursday, on the 29th of October, at the completion of these sessions, and we will be proceeding to the set-asides in the coming weeks. Thanks, Cole. So engaging with the community, there have been lots of questions, and again, these were raised last week in our stakeholder sessions on on how the community can better engage with the traditional owners. A couple of points that we really need to articulate is that Parks Victoria's role as a land manager does not include requiring traditional owners to meet or undertake negotiations with any parties. We really encourage the individuals and groups to build their own respectful relationships with traditional owners to increase the opportunities for engagement. We also acknowledge that the current uncertainty and stress within the community. It isn't an easy time. We understand that and acknowledge that, and it certainly is recognised by Parks Victoria and Barinja Gadgin Land Council. And we are working very hard to try and resolve these matters in a timely manner. The protection of the cultural values is paramount. It's also acknowledged that there's a large proportion of the community who support the current approach to site protection. And again, this is hugely appreciated by Barinja Gadgin and Parks Victoria. There has, however, unfortunately been some negative public commentary, aggressive correspondence, evidence of graffiti in the park over recent days, and a history of people ignoring the advisory signage, and that's seen by both Parks Victoria and Barinja Gadgin as disrespectful and not in the spirit of reconciliation. Thanks, Kyle. So that's the wrap of the Arapiles area. I just did want to provide a quick update on Garryword. I have mentioned the draft Greater Garryword Landscape Management Plan is due for release this year. The draft has been provided to the Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change, and we are awaiting further advice on the release. Once the plan is released, it and supporting documents will be available on Engage Victoria platform, and online community information and discussion sessions will be held. So stay tuned for updates on that, and everyone will be able to provide feedback on the plan. So I also want to provide a quick update on Taipan Wall. We understand that is a very special place for the local communities and rock climbing communities as well. So Parks Victoria has met with traditional owners and representatives from GWERN, Garryword Women Reconciliation Network, out on site. I might add that GWERN were in attendance on the invitation of traditional owners. So at those site meetings, we discussed the possibility of climbing access to Taipan Wall in the future. So we were assessing the registered Aboriginal sites, the climbing routes, and we had some very healthy discussions. As a result of that, GWERN has produced a comprehensive report regarding the climbing usage of the area and other recreation, and the intersect with the climbing areas with the registered Aboriginal places. This report has been submitted to traditional owners for consideration and is currently being considered by the Garryword traditional owners and could lead to managed access in the future. So the discussions in that space are ongoing, and yeah, we're hoping for a positive outcome. All right, that brings it to the end of the presentation. So I might.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Will. And a lot of questions that there are there. So I'm just going to go through this side column here. I noticed one of the first questions there was, are you not going to answer the questions that you don't like? That's not the intent behind this at all. I've now admitted all questions that were present throughout the presentation. It's really a question of time. So we got 59, and we're going to get through as many of these as possible. For those that we don't get through, we'll take on notice and make sure that we're answering that in future forums. So that's the answer to the first question. Second one, I actually might just group a few of them which came together under the umbrella of harm. So there's a few questions here about what evidence exists that rock climbers are causing harm. So I might ask Will to kick off on that one, and perhaps Simon Crocker might be able to elaborate a little bit. Will, just on the question of evidence of harm and the concept of harm in this discussion.
Just a bit in context, I mentioned it in the earlier on in the slides. The rock art assessments did identify harm at the Aboriginal places. I'm very clear to articulate that they haven't been attributed to rock climbers. They're attributed in general to park users. And they included, I haven't got the slide in front of me, but I mentioned, the shotgun damage and the pellets and graffiti and litter. So I hope that answers that question. Thanks, Dave.
And Simon, would you like to tag in there just to reiterate a little bit of the obligations around harm from a legislative point of view?
Yeah, sure. I mean, following on from Will, as he says, there's more than rock climbing activities that are having impacts on Aboriginal places. When it comes to, I think the question was around, how do you know that it's rock climbers causing harm? I mean, there is evidence that things like climbing chalk, when mixed with the skin from hands, can be absorbed into the rock, and it makes it very difficult to remove. And it has the act of staining the rock art. So there is the potential that activity can cause harm, particularly when you're talking about places, like at Durite 1, where the artwork can't be readily seen with the naked eye, that you do need to use photogrammetry. It makes it very difficult to avoid those kind of places without being able to see them, and those motifs are all over the climbing surfaces of Durite 1. So the risk of harm being caused by climbing activities is real.
Simon, just while I've got you on screen there, I might go to there's a next question here about the Interim Protection Declaration, which was previously supporting the brain death boulder Durite 1. It expired and the new protections relate to all of the declaration crag. Is there a rationale for why this has ebbed between the larger protection order, smaller protection order, and return to the previous larger protection order? You touched a little bit on this in the presentation, but I just wonder if you could address that one.
Yeah, sure. So the request came through for the Interim Protection Declaration towards the very end of last year, and that followed, I believe there was the request from Brenjigadjin and Parks for park users to stay out of that area that included Durite 1 and 2, or the entire Taylor's Rock complex. But after that request, there was climbing chalk was observed on the rock face of Durite 1. So the belief was that Durite 1 being so close to the road and having rock art that was that couldn't be seen with the naked eye made it particularly susceptible, and that extra level of protection was warranted for that particular Aboriginal place. So the Interim Protection Declaration was obviously put in place as an interim measure to provide that time for land users and for the park manager and Brenjigadjin to consider more long-term ongoing protection measures. To extend the Interim Protection Declaration, the requirements under the Act would be that we would have to make that declaration again, or the minister would have to make that declaration again, and it actually took us longer to pull together all the information to make the declaration than it was in effect for. So it's a very administrative heavy process, and there simply wasn't time to carry that out before the protection declaration expired. And instead, we're moving into this next phase now, where we're considering protection measures not only for Durite 1 but for these other places that we're discussing today as well.
Great, thanks, Simon. I'll keep on working through these questions as fast as I can, seeing that we've got around 70 there. So I'll group together as many as I can. Nice acknowledgement of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people there. Thank you, Matt. We've got a question here from Maria Pizzi, might be able to help us out as the Director of Managing Country Together. Maria, the question here is, can you explain how joint management differs to co-management and how this will affect everyday users of Arapiles?
Well, I can, in general terms, talk about joint management. There's material on various websites. DELP's got some lovely videos of joint management that have been made with traditional owners who are involved in joint management. So that will give you some practical examples of how joint management's already working in a number of parks. I think it's 17 parks that are already in joint management, and there'll be another 7 joining that are, moving in that direction in Tanarong country at the moment. So around about 24 are either there or about to get there. It allows for a broader role for traditional owners, and it establishes a traditional owner land management board, which is the the structure that manages the park or the reserve. With co-management, the title to the land remains with Parks Victoria, and there's not this traditional owner land management board structure that is established as the planner for that area. Parks Victoria remains a joint manager with the traditional owner land management board. So in that sense, Parks Victoria is still part of the process. But in a different way, it's a different legal sort of setup to the co-management system, and probably some of the detail it differs depending on how the joint management process is adopted by the different traditional owners who are involved in it. So the Gunner and Kurnai model, so Gunner and Kurnai down in Gippsland, they're joint managers. Their model is slightly different to Djadjarurrung, which is a model that's been adopted around Bendigo with the Djadjarurrung people. And then there's the Yorta Yorta is a joint management of the Barmah National Park with Parks Victoria. Tanarong is about to enter into joint management arrangements as well, and the way they'll do it will again be sort of adapted to the ways that Tanarong wishes to proceed. So I know that's not very specific, but as I say, there is material available publicly, and particularly through the DELP website, that you can get more details there as well.
Thanks, Maria. A few more questions about harm, which I believe that we've covered, but I might just ask Simon just on, there's a particular question here about the scope. So Simon Crocker, just the scope, is there scope to change the laws around the level of protection offered between rock art and quarrying? So questions about levels of protection there.
Yeah, well, I mean, all Aboriginal places and objects are protected to the same degree under the legislation. So it's not differentiated between different place types or different levels of significance. It's all all places that meet the definition of Aboriginal cultural heritage have the same level of protection.
And just while I've got you on screen there, Simon, there is a question here about today's story about the Djadjarurrung directions tree and its removal. I guess the answer to that is that's not the purpose of today's forum, and that there will be we believe, other statements coming out of government to that effect. Anything to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it. Obviously, that's this is an emerging issue today, and it's not one that I've prepared to talk to people about today. But there are releases, media releases, and comments coming out from the relevant ministers and from the formally recognised traditional owner group, Eastern Ma, should be coming out over the next day or so. So worth keeping an eye out for those.
Great. Thanks very much, Simon. There's a few more questions here around harm, protecting what was unharmed. I might go here to a question here about why is Lil Lil being considered along with Arapiles? How do you separate the evidence? Will, this might be a question for you. Will Cox?
Yeah, it's been, as I mentioned before, we undertook assessments at 31 rock art sites across the Garryoord and Durat landscapes. Now, out of those assessments, there were some areas that were identified to be at immediate risk, and these sites that we've gone through today in Arapiles and Lil were those areas that required immediate protections. And yeah, I think that probably answers that question. They were priority sites.
Cool. Thanks, Will. Question here about, given the ongoing situation in the Grampians, why should climbers have any confidence that this won't just be blanket closures? So Jamie Staples, our district manager. Jamie, did you want to talk a little bit about the upcoming Garryword management plan and the ongoing process we have there? Might be on mute there, Jamie.
So thank you. My apologies. So as you're aware, just as you indicated, we do have an upcoming management plan that's sitting with the Minister as we speak. So that management plan will help us implement SPAs and other mechanisms to determine where and how we can involve other community activities within the parks. So I think that's probably the fundamental difference here.
Thanks, Jamie. Question here about why don't you shut down Bells Beach if you apply the same restrictions consistently? It'd be illegal to do most activities. 80% of the ban surfing now. John, I'll take that as a comment. Parks Victoria doesn't manage Bells Beach, but I understand the point and take it as a comment. Is there an Aboriginal representative in this session? Yes, we've got Darren Griffin. From Barinja Land Council. Might have missed the introductions there. Who made the reports? Ben Gunn. Is that correct, Will, that Ben Gunn's made all the reports?
The rock art assessments, yes, were undertaken by Ben Gunn. Okay,
that one answered. How can you prove all this as climbers? I think we've addressed that. That's not the accusation that this is a broader visitor issue that we're trying to address here. So looking forward to continuing that discussion because it's not directed just at rock climbers, it's broader visitation. Why is locking people out considered a management strategy? I'll take that as a comment. Will Parks Victoria prevent park users from entering at Hollow Mountain, Beehive Falls, Wonderland that contain important Aboriginal rock quarries and rock art that has already been damaged? Will Cox, could I ask you to respond to that one?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Look, we've been made aware over the last week that there are other cultural values in the Grampians National Park in areas where there is recreation. Jason Borg, who is our regional director, has publicly stated that we will undertake some inspections of those areas with traditional owners to determine whether any site protections are required at those areas. So we are building a list together thanks to the input from community members, and we're getting onto that one as soon as we can.
Cool. Thanks, Will. Look, just while I got you on screen there, why should we comply with this request to stay out when the following is the same request in the Grampians, nothing has come of it and the areas are still closed? Maybe we want to talk about next steps for the Grampians?
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, with the release of the draft plan later this year, it will become apparent, I guess, of the outcomes or the results of those surveys, and it will become much clearer to rock climbers in particular about where access is available in the future or possible in the future. And we see a similar process being undertaken at Arapiles to follow a similar decision-making process to clearly articulate where the values are and how they need to be protected and where access may be appropriate in the future.
Well, thanks, Will. I'll take a comment there from John Fisher about the Hertzian percussion cone. Great work, PV. Glad to see you're backing the protection of these sites from inappropriate activities. Also take that as a comment. Can the routes on Tiger Wall be accessed from above, given the heritage assets are located on the ground below? And if not, why? Wilcox, I might ask you to answer that one.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my presentation, Dave, we've had the feedback from stakeholders regarding this issue, and we're committed to discussing this with Barinja Gadget Land Council and to seek further clarification in the preparation of the set-asides. And as I mentioned before, whether the wrap-in climb-out approach is possible. But we need to have further discussions with BGLC on that matter.
Just a follow-up question here, Will, about evidence of quarrying and what it might look like to the naked eye.
Look, that's probably one that I might throw to Maria. It's very hard to describe, but it's information which I'd probably is quite sensitive, and I'd rather throw it to Maria or to Darren to provide that response.
So quarrying is about as a part of the manufacturing of stone tools. The way in which stone tools are manufactured will vary from quarry to quarry. So there will be different signs that people look for. Qualified archaeologists work with traditional owners and with traditional owner representatives to conduct surveys across the parks. And one of the forms of material culture that will come to people's attention is quarrying. I know Simon might want to add some more detail, and maybe Darren as well. So I'll leave it there and see if you want to add anything further.
Simon?
Yeah, there is some information on the Aboriginal Victoria website. We have some information sheets about different Aboriginal place types, and I believe there's one on quarrying. So you should be able to find that pretty easily. It'll talk about different, there's telltale signs in the rock that archaeologists can tell that that stone has been removed by human agency. There's certain markings that can't be created by rocks exfoliating on their own or from being knocked by other things. But Darren, is there anything else you wanted to raise?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say that the quarrying at Durite is one of the most extensive that we know of in Victoria. There's another quarry that's probably as comparable of importance, which is the Mount William Greenstone Axe Quarry, and that is listed on the National Heritage List. So it's a really important place. I mean, Durite actually means stone in Jawajali language. So the Durite Balug were the people of the stone, and that means the Mt Arapiles itself, but also the stone that they quarried, and it's an extensive quarry place, and that stone is found traded right throughout Victoria. So it's the quarries that are at Durite are really extensive, and that's been pointed out by a lot of archaeologists, not just Ben Gunn. There's a 1992 report from Vanessa Edmonds that says the same thing.
Thanks very much for that, Darren. Okay, so just scrolling down through, we're getting a few of these, and I appreciate there's lots of questions, so we're giving it a good go to get through as many as we can. You're telling us what's already been announced. Hopefully you're learning a bit more today, just from the different voices today. Why is it necessary to close a large and significant area to all public access while the assessment process and site management plan is developed? I believe we've covered that, Steve. If not, happy to come back to it. Who's done the assessments? We've covered that one. Are we causing harm or not? Surely, possibly is not the grounds for draconian measures. Appreciate your comment. I'll take that as a comment. Why doesn't Parks Victoria and Aboriginal Victoria charge individuals with damaging cultural heritage? I cannot find any examples of this happening at Arapiles or the Grampians. Now, I might ask Simon and or Jamie to speak to this one. Simon, are you happy to tag in?
Yeah, sure. So we do have an enforcement and compliance team in Aboriginal Victoria. We've got over, I think, 20 authorised officers that carry out a range of different investigations under the Act for acts of harm and other offences that we have. But as I suggested at the start, the bulk of the work we do is trying to assist people to not cause harm in the first place. Of course, if there is information that comes to us about individuals who have harmed Aboriginal cultural heritage, and there's evidence that we can follow up on that, we will investigate all cases. But for things, like the recreational use of public land, it's much more. We prefer to be much more proactive in trying to avoid harm occurring in the first place.
Thanks, Simon. Jamie, did you want to add to that from a regional district perspective?
Yeah, thank you, David. Yes, we do carry out, obviously, compliance operations, but our first approach should be always education, and that's our view. The second side to that is we physically got to catch people breaking the rules to obviously apply any legislation to their acts. So our first view is always and should be education, and that's the view we take. And if harm is continued, then we do seek other alternatives, but we do undertake investigations, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. So working through them here, I think the question about Tiger Wall has been answered, Steve. What other areas at Arapiles are under assessment for similar protections? Either Will or Darren, perhaps Darren would like to answer that one.
Sure, Will can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the assessment that we're going to do starting in a couple of weeks, we'll be looking at all the climbing places in Durai. So we'll do assessment of all the areas that have climbs, and have a look at how we can manage the impacts on the cultural heritage, if any.
Yeah, that's right, Darren. Thanks. And yeah, the focus really is to provide certainty for the climbing community and the broader community around. Obviously, the focus is to re-identify any cultural values and ensure that it's adequately protected. However, we hear the message very loudly from the climbing community and the local community about the need for certainty around access to the mount in the future, and we hope that this process will clearly resolve that.
A very specific question there about the shotgun marks, almost certainly being historical use as a rifle range, and it's decades old. Will, have you got anything to add to that question?
Look, that's no. Other than the evidence was found that there is shotgun marks, and there was no assumption made or about when it may have happened. It was purely based on the observations at the time.
Great, thanks, Will. Why have none of the sites been assessed and found not to have cultural heritage assets been reopened? So far, all we've seen is closure after closure with no evidence of PV acting in good faith to restore access. This means trust and respect for PVs at an all-time low. Work with us, James. Will, did you want to just reiterate a few of the next steps on how we try to get a bit of that certainty for the climbing community?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So Parks Victoria has really recognises the need and the importance of working through this issue in a quick manner. Hence, we've made the funding available, and we are in the process of planning the assessments, and we are trying to undertake these assessments as quickly as we can, and to, as I mentioned, to apply a similar decision-making framework as we have at Garryword, and it's in everyone's interest that we can work through this process and have resolution as soon as we can.
Okay, there's a few more questions here about harm and evidence of harm.
looks like we might have lost Dave. Are you with us, Dave?
It looks like we may have lost them. I'm happy to step in and facilitate the questions. So in terms of, hello, my name's Cole. I've been helping in the background. Some of you will have seen me answering the questions. I'm a backup facilitator. The question that we were on is around evidence of harm and, what evidence we have. We'll just want to reiterate the reports that were done and what we found.
Yeah. So again, I don't have that slide in front of me, but the assessments of the rock art sites and the surrounding areas did identify damage, including graffiti, shotgun damage, rock breakage, litter, climbing chalk, and the presence of climbing bolts, and campfires as well. So have a look at that third bottom dot point that outlines the evidence of visitor impacts. And again, I reiterate that those impacts have not been attributed to rock climbers. They're based purely on observations of visitor impacts of these sites.
Thanks, Will. Now, please ask patience as I catch up with where exactly the questions were at. There's been a few questions around the impact that climbing and these decisions could have on the Natty Muck community. Is there any comments that you'd be happy to provide, Will, about that?
Look, we had these discussions with the stakeholders last week, and we are really mindful of the impacts that this may have on the local community. And as we've mentioned throughout this presentation, we're really keen to continue to work with the community and to try and, I guess, achieve the best resolution we can for this issue. And we ask that for support from the community as we work through this process.
Thanks, Will. Another one here that may be for you, but also Simon could talk to as well. Will Parks Victoria and Berengee Land Council consider approaches that minimise or ban specific potential harm, so ceasing use of bolting and chalk in risk areas over general exclusion? Either of you like to start?
So I'm just reading that question, sorry. So we're always open to continually improving how we work through this issue, and I can't speak for Berengee Gadgin, but as I mentioned, we have been applying a decision-making process for Garryword, and that will become apparent once the draft plan is released. And our intent is to apply the same process for this project.
Right. Is there anything to add there, Simon, about certain different types of approaches?
The only thing I would add is, as I was talking about with the ongoing protection declarations, is that it is a set of ministerial directions that can account for a range of different things. So for the interim protection declaration at Durai 1, it was, again, because of its size, it was just restricting all access. But if for ongoing protection declarations in other areas, there might be a range of different requirements that could accommodate some things, some activities happening in some locations potentially.
Great, thank you. Now Dave is back on the line, so I'm going to hand the question facilitation over to him. If we've missed any in the transfer, we will go back and look at the recording and make sure we follow up with any, but I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Do apologise, everyone. That was a bit of a power fault at my end. So just getting through those questions here. So a few more questions here about harm. Just looking through, why can't photos of these amazing discoveries be posted for people to see as they get discovered? Might be a question there for maybe Darren. Would you like to take that one?
Sorry, what was that one again?
Question was, why can't the photos of these amazing discoveries be posted for people to see as they get discovered?
Yeah, sure. So that's completely up to the traditional owners. In the past, these places have been published and then they've been vandalised or destroyed. We've had a lot of issues with that in the past, especially with scarred trees and other sites. You talk about shotgun pellets. There was a lot of people who used to try and shoot out rock art. So in the past, that's why it's up to the traditional owners really if they want to release these photos and when they want to do it. So they just need a bit. It will happen. We just have to work through a way of doing it so that the traditional owners feel secure that their sites aren't going to be destroyed.
So good comment here from Rob Grenfell. Is there a chance of a facilitated process being led by Aboriginal Victoria and the broader community and BGLC? Current process is certainly heading in a direction that's creating some hostilities. Arapiles is a very important climbing spot, but also very important for the regional economy and much broader than the Nadamuck extending to Horsham. So a much broader consultation is necessary on this occasion. I might make the comment that some more of a whole of government approach might be for that, particularly when you're talking about regional economies. We certainly have stepped out today, Rob, a few of the next steps that we intend to work with BGLC, just to step through the next steps of the process for creating some certainty around the park. Not sure whether, Maria, would you like to comment at all about?
What would you like me to comment on specifically, Dave?
So the broader facilitated process with the community around what the next steps might look for the region.
So we've been talking a lot about how Parks Victoria works with traditional owners, and particularly here Berejiklian, to protect cultural values on the park. We also obviously have environmental values to consider as part of the considerations, but we've really focused around Aboriginal cultural heritage, and therefore the traditional owners' perspective is critical to that. In terms of the sort of regional community and the engagement with regional community, my understanding is that we have an advisory group specifically that relates to the park. There's also a community group that's based around Nadimuck, and as far as I know, that group is open to broader participation from elsewhere across the region. Is that right, Will?
As far as I'm aware, Maria, that's right. They're the Arapiles District Community Group. So I would imagine it's the sort of broader Arapiles Nadamuck area.
Well, thanks, Maria, and thanks, Will. What about a fine-grained approach if you actually identify areas adequately instead of closing great swaths of rock faces? That would make sense. So, Will, did you want to talk again about this is sort of the question about the nuanced approach given the approach that we're taking?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So where that's appropriate and where traditional owners support that nuanced approach, we will explore those options. However, we just need to be mindful that Aboriginal places often extend beyond the presence of tangible values, and the actual area of where these values are present, known as an Aboriginal place, may have intangible values that are very important to the traditional owners. And we need to be very mindful of that in our planning and decision making.
Okay, just going through the next few questions here, a few comments here about why not ban chalk at Arapiles, which is quite a specific one. Why are the restrictions targeting only climbers when PV is developing huge lengths of highly impactful walking trails at the same time? Will, did you want to touch on this is more broadly about visitors rather than rock climbers specifically?
Yeah, that's right, Dave. So the signage that we've installed is requesting all park visitors do not enter these areas. And likewise, as we proceed to the set-aside determinations, it will be to prohibit all access. So there's no specific user group that's being singled out on this occasion. It's all public access.
A comment here about are we able to make our signage clearer? We'll take that as a comment. I'm sure that we can improve on the signage as this process develops. So take that one on board. So the answer to the first question shows there's no actual harm done, no actual harm done, then it's stated that potential harm. That I don't think that was part of the presentation. I think Will has gone through the areas of harm, so I think we've probably covered that one. Is PV or BGLC concerned that decisions that have been made will destroy local community? So as part of this this process of community engagement, we are trying to instill a process where we are working together. So we did have those community meetings last week, and we're looking to increase the frequency of those so that we are working closer together and that there is that channel of communication. So I do implore you to stick with us a bit on the engagement front. Okay, will there be explicit written protection for recreational activities, including rock climbing, in the recognition and settlement agreement being negotiated that's currently being negotiated between BGLC and the state of Victoria? In a theoretical sense, Maria, is that something that would be included within a usual recognition and settlement agreement?
Recognition and settlement agreements are negotiated between a traditional owner traditional owner group, traditional owner entity, as they are, yep. Traditional owner group entities, and the state of Victoria. They cover a range of factors, and they consider pre-existing uses of land, that whether they relate to recreational uses or commercial uses, and each of those recognition and settlement agreements are different, and they're unique to that traditional owner group entity and their rights and aspirations in their country as negotiated with the state of Victoria. Again, there's a lot of information about recognition and settlement agreements in terms of the areas that they cover under the Department of Justice and Community Safety, which is the lead part of government that does the negotiations with traditional owner group entities. In this particular case, the recognition and settlement agreement has not been finalised, so I can't comment on a recognition and settlement agreement that would pertain to Mt Arapiles Tourism State Park, because at this moment it hasn't been finalised.
Thanks, Maria. Interesting question here about the set-aside determinations. Has the Minister already approved the set-aside determinations that the timetable sets out as coming? Maybe Simon, are you in a position to talk about how set-asides work and how they get processed?
I think that'll be a question for Will.
More Will?
Yeah, I can answer that. To answer the question specifically, no, the Minister hasn't approved the set-asides. We haven't, it's not actually approved by the Minister, it's approved by a delegate. On this occasion, the delegate is likely to be our Chief Executive Officer. We haven't prepared the documentation for the set-aside as yet. We have been waiting for the feedback from these sessions to help inform our planning for those set-asides, and likewise, there's still further discussions, as I've mentioned, with BGLC regarding the size and extent and detail of those set-asides. So, yeah, we've still got some work to do for these set-asides to actually be approved and enacted.
Thanks very much, Will. Question here, could you please answer the question regarding consistency with protection in different parts of the park, for example, popular walks in the Grampians with cultural values? Will, that might be another one for you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, as we become aware of cultural values, we right across our whole park management estate, we do, in partnership with traditional owners, undertake site protection. As I mentioned before, we have been made aware of some areas where there may be some cultural values. These haven't been verified, so they do need inspections with PB and traditional owners, and indeed may need further surveying. And if if they are in need of or require additional protection, we will implement actions to do so.
Thanks, Will. I might just keep, while you're on screen there, follow-up question here. Is there a RAP, a registered Aboriginal party for Gary Word Grampians?
Barinja Land Council is the RAP for Mt Arapiles Tuan State Park. There is no appointed RAP for the Gary Word landscape.
And do you want to just talk about what the management arrangements are there? So with the Gary Word landscape management plan, for example, and who the parties are that we're currently working with there?
Yeah, so Parks Victoria works in partnership with three traditional owner corporations, so Gunditj Mirring Traditional Owner Aboriginal Corporation, Eastern Mar Aboriginal Corporation, and Barinja Land Council, and all decisions through the preparation and decision making around the draft management plan have been made in partnership with those three corporations.
Thanks, Will. Comment here from Keith Lockwood about the base of Tiger Wall, cattle grazed along the base for decades. What's left? Scientific peer review is crucial. I'll take that as a comment, Keith. Are you obliged to consider negative impact on the region? I think we've discussed this one in a broader context on how more broadly government works together as we're undertaking these works. Can you please address problems economically? That's probably the same question there. PV has mentioned that there are not different levels of protection required for different types of findings, but can a different management approach be taken to protect different findings? And has this approach been considered, for example, rock art versus chipped rock? I think Will's covered that one in terms of the nuanced approach to these cultural works. Okay, there's a memorial to a climber who died on Syrinx on Tiger Wall. Will access to this site be allowed? We'll take that as a comment, thank you, and we'll follow that one up. And unless, Will, you've got any information about that memorial?
That'll just form part of that discussion I've mentioned previously with BGLC, Dave, and the appropriateness of climbing in certain areas.
Okay. What stage is the Gary Word Grampians in the TO Settlement Act process and the negotiation of a recognition of settlement agreement? Maria, have you got an update on what stage that's at the moment?
To some extent, yes. So the three traditional owner corporations that Will mentioned before represent the traditional owners who are parties to an Indigenous land use agreement, which has been registered with the Native Title Tribunal. There was a native title claim that had been lodged over the Grampians, and that claim has been withdrawn with consent. At this stage, my understanding is that there's not a new claim in preparation, but the three traditional owner groups that were involved in the previous native title claim are clear that they may pursue that in the future. They may also pursue a recognition and settlement agreement so that traditional owners have both options. But at this time, my understanding is there are no current negotiations under the Traditional Owner Settlement Act with those three traditional owner groups.
Great, thanks, Maria. We've got about 10 minutes left, so bear with me as we'll get through as many of these as we can. Will, I might just get you to reiterate something earlier on in the presentation just to address this question, because I think it's quite critical. Does Parks Victoria have any plans to bring in further closures at Arapiles, or can you confirm it is limited to what you've set out in this presentation? So would you mind just running over that line again, please, Will?
Yeah, sure, Dave. So obviously what we know at the moment is that Stage 1 is the advisory signage requesting people stay out of certain areas. Stage 2 is the enactment of set-asides for those 5 areas that we've run through. And Stage 3 is the archaeological surveys and environmental surveys. Pending the outcomes of those, there may be a need for further site protection, but we can't confirm that until we have received the report and worked through that report with traditional owners.
Thanks, Will. If you've been informed about places damaged, why don't you close the whole park before? I'll take that as a comment. Comment here about signage and changing signage. Thanks, Claire. From this question thread, it's really clear there's a lot of climbers still hold on to racist and prejudiced beliefs. I guess this is reflecting a little bit on the presentation, as we are asking people to talk through these issues with us in a civil tone. So cultural heritage it's a significant park management and cultural thing for us to be working through with the Berengee Land Council. So really reiterating on next steps to be as civil as possible as we work together on this. When will you involve some rock climber expertise in some of this? Very lopsided at the moment. Will, did you want to talk to that a little bit and how we might involve more rock climbing expertise?
Look, we're always open for discussions with the climbing community, and we have done so through the Rock Climbing Roundtable. And I personally do have discussions with representatives from some of those groups as well. Look, in the long term, the perfect picture is that that Parks Victoria does have a strong relationship with the climbing community, and likewise traditional owners do as well. But as I mentioned before, the traditional owner relationship with the community, that the community needs to form their own relationship with the traditional owners. So that is our aim, is to forge better relationships right across the board, and we're hoping that we can progress that as quickly as we can.
So a few comments about history. Why didn't you do something back in 1992? Look, we are entering into a new phase of park management here. This really is priority stuff for us. So hopefully you're getting a little bit of the detail of where that's going from today's presentation. It is really built on relationships and co-management and joint management, and how we can really respectfully manage these special places. What will happen when an Aboriginal wants to climb near an area of quarrying? I might take that one as a comment. Have any of the people presenting this session been instrumental or involved in making the decisions to date? Will Cox is our senior manager looking after this project, so that's certainly the case. Working very closely with the Berengee Land Council, represented by Darren here today. Okay, just working through the last few ones. So what sort of juicy ones can I get here for you, Will? Okay, given culture is important, why hasn't PV protected the scar tree that is rotting away at Centenary Park? I'll have to take that one as a comment. Is there room to celebrate and educate about cultural heritage rather than treat sites with fear? Surely examples from other states' cultural significant sites and how they are treated could indicate there are better alternatives available rather than banning all park users indefinitely. Maria, do you have any thoughts on that movement towards education for the management of cultural heritage?
Yeah, I think Darren made some good comments about that, as has Simon, that what we all hope for the future, I think, is that all Victorians will appreciate and recognise and respect traditional owners and their continuing connection and use of country for countless generations. So there's all sorts of movements that we see that are in that direction. Traditional owners, as often is the case, take the lead with many of those things, but Aboriginal Victoria has also put a lot of effort into education around Aboriginal issues generally and Aboriginal cultural heritage specifically. There are some places right now in Victoria that are celebrated uniquely for their Aboriginal cultural values. No better example than Budge Bim that's very close by to the places we're talking about tonight, a place that's on the World Heritage List for its Aboriginal cultural values. So there's lots of things that are happening already, and certainly my hope is that we will expand those activities in the coming weeks, months and years.
Thanks, Maria. We only have about 4 minutes left here, so just given there's a lot of rock climbers on the call today, we might just end with one of the questions here about, and Will, I might ask you to answer this one as well, which is, why aren't there clear acts of stewardship and conservation from climbers being acknowledged? Pharaoh's Gully and Central Gully tracks would not exist if it were not for the rock climbing. What about native tree planting that occurs, and again by volunteers, why are only considered to have a negative impact on the park? Will, would you like to address that?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Look, we're really appreciative of the work in partnership that's been undertaken in the past with the climbing community through Cliff Care and BCC and other community groups. And we acknowledged that earlier on in the presentation. We have had a history of working with the climbing community. So we're really appreciative of that, and appreciative of the respect and love that climbers do have for Mt Arapiles. So I guess we haven't communicated at all today, and that you're considered to have a negative impact on the park at all. You know, we've been very clear in articulating that the impacts that have been observed at these sites are from all park visitors. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks very much, Will. We're drawing it to a close there. So with all the questions there, we've got around 150 there. That's really important for us to start to help to shape the next phases of engagement around this project and the ongoing management of the park. So I'd like to thank everybody who has tuned in today. We do have another one of these sessions the same time tomorrow, and we do look forward to future conversations. In the rock climbing space, there's a lot more to be discussed around the upcoming Gary Word Landscape Management Plan, of which we'll be running a lot of sessions around that as well. So do look forward to continuing the discussion in a respectful fashion through both ways. I'd also like to thank all of our presenters today. Thank you, Simon Crocker, Will Cox, Maria Pizzi, Jamie Staples, Darren Griffin. Thank you very much for joining us today, Darren, and also some of the guys who have been helping out with the various tech challenges, Cole Wrigley, Prue Daly and Kaz Trimby. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll look forward to having this discussion again sometime soon. Thank you all.